The blood-red sunset painted Natalie Winters' face as she pressed her back against the rough wooden pillar of the saloon, heart hammering so loudly she feared it might give away her position. Clutched in her trembling hand was a piece of paper evidence of the most terrible betrayal she'd ever experienced. She'd trusted Pierce Halloway with everything: her heart, her future, and her father's land deed. Now the paper in her hand proved what she'd refused to believe for months: Pierce had never intended to marry her. He'd only wanted her father's ranch, Texas, 1875. The world was changing fast, but some things remained constant: greed, ambition, and the willingness of men to take what they wanted. Natalie had been blind to it all, swept away by Pierce's smooth words and confident promises. "He ain't worth those tears, madam." The deep voice startled her, and Natalie hastily wiped her cheeks, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. She looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the fading light. A stranger, his face partially obscured by the brim of a dusty black hat. "I wasn't crying," she lied, straightening her spine and tucking the damning letter into her pocket. The stranger stepped closer, and she could make out his features: now strong jawline covered in several days' worth of beard, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a scar that cut through his right eyebrow. He wasn't handsome in the polished way Pierce was, but there was something compelling about his weathered face. "Name's Zachariah Reeves," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Most folks call me Zach." "I don't recall asking," Natalie replied, trying to edge away from the saloon wall. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough, but I reckon a lady shouldn't be hiding in shadows looking like she's lost everything." "What would you know about it?" she snapped, her grief making her sharp. "More than you might think." His eyes flickered to the saloon's swinging doors. "That Pierce Halloway in there, he's made a lot of enemies." Natalie froze. "You know Pierce?" "Know of him. Man's reputation travels." Zach's expression darkened. "Land swindler. Specialty is courting women with property, then disappearing with the deeds once they're signed over." The confirmation of Pierce's treachery made Natalie's knees weak. He promised to marry me, said we'd build something together on my father's land. "And now you know different," Zach said, his voice gentler than his appearance would suggest. Inside the saloon, raucous laughter erupted, followed by Pierce's distinctive voice boasting about his latest acquisition. Natalie flinched at the sound. "I need to get away from here," she whispered, more to herself than to the stranger. Zach studied her for a long moment. "Got a horse?" She nodded. "At the livery." "Then I suggest you collect it and ride out. That man in there," he jerked his head toward the saloon, "he won't take kindly to being discovered." Natalie hesitated. "Where would I go? He has the deed to my home now." "Got family?" "No one. My father died last winter. It was just me and the ranch." Zach's expression was unreadable as he glanced again toward the saloon doors. "Listen, Miss Winters. Natalie Winters. Miss Winters, I'm heading north to deliver some horses. Could use an extra hand for the journey." He paused. "It would get you away from here, give you time to think." Suspicion flickered across her face. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Maybe I've seen too many people like Halloway get away with theft, or maybe I just don't like seeing a lady in distress." He shrugged. "Your choice. Trust me or don't." Natalie studied him, weighing her limited options. The stranger before her was rough-looking and mysterious, but his eyes held something Pierce's never had: honesty. "I trusted the wrong man once," she said softly. "Why should I trust you instead?" Zach's mouth curved into a half-smile. "Fair question. I can't give you a reason that'll satisfy. All I can say is I'm offering help with no strings attached. You want to part ways once we're a safe distance from here. That's your choice." From inside the saloon came the sound of a chair scraping back. Pierce's voice grew louder as he approached the doors. "Time's up for thinking, Miss Winters," Zach said quietly. "What'll it be?" Natalie took a deep breath. "The livery. I'll meet you there in 10 minutes." Zach nodded once and melted into the shadows as the saloon doors swung open. Natalie slipped around the corner of the building just as Pierce emerged, his arm slung around the waist of a saloon girl who giggled at whatever he'd whispered in her ear. Fury and hurt warred within Natalie as she hurried toward her boarding house, keeping to the shadows. She had little to pack: some clothes, a photograph of her parents, her mother's silver hairbrush. Within minutes, she had everything she owned tied in a bundle. Mrs. Fletcher, her landlady, raised eyebrows at Natalie's hasty departure, but asked no questions when handed the remainder of the month's rent. Small-town discretion was sometimes a blessing. The livery was quiet when Natalie arrived, most of its occupants having retired for the evening. Her mare, Penny, nickered softly at her approach. As Natalie saddled the horse, doubt crept in. Was she truly going to ride off with a stranger based on nothing more than his word and her desperate circumstances? "Good girl," she murmured to Penny, buying time with her thoughts. "Ready to ride?" Zach's voice came from the entrance. He led a sturdy black gelding already saddled. "I don't even know where we're going," Natalie said, tightening Penny's cinch. "North, like I said. Got a string of horses to deliver to a ranch near Laramie." He patted his mount's neck. "It's honest work." "And what do you expect of me?" She faced him directly. "Help with the horses, cook when I hunt, keep watch while I sleep." He shrugged. "Same as any trail hand, and that's all." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not Halloway, Miss Winters. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep, and I don't take what isn't freely given." Something in his steady gaze convinced her, or perhaps it was simply that she had nowhere else to go. "Then let's ride," she said, mounting Penny in one fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. Zach's eyebrows rose slightly, impressed. "You handle yourself well." "My father raised me on horseback." A flash of grief crossed her face. "The ranch was everything to him, and I just lost it." "Not if the deed was obtained by fraud," Zach said, leading the way out of the livery. "Law might have something to say about that." "The law," Natalie scoffed quietly. "Sheriff Taylor has been in Pierce's pocket for years." They rode in silence through the darkened streets of Willow Creek, the small town Natalie had called home her entire life. As they passed the saloon, she couldn't help glancing inside. Pierce was at a table, cards in hand, laughing. The man who had promised to love her forever didn't even notice as she rode out of his life. Once clear of town, they pushed the horses to a steady canter. The night air was cool against Natalie's face, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. After an hour, when she was certain they weren't being followed, she began to relax marginally. "How far to where these horses are?" she asked, breaking the silence. 2 days' ride." "Ranch called Whispering Pines." Zach's voice carried easily in the night stillness. "Owner's an old friend, been training some quarter horses for him. You're a horse trainer, among other things." He glanced at her. "You good to ride through the night?" "Be safer to put some distance between us and Halloway before we rest." Natalie nodded. "I can ride." They continued in companionable silence, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to Natalie's tumultuous thoughts. The moon rose, casting silver light across the rolling landscape. Despite everything, Natalie found herself noticing the beauty of the night, something she might have missed if she were still in Willow Creek, planning her wedding to a liar. By dawn, they had covered significant ground. Zach led them to a small creek sheltered by cottonwoods, an ideal spot to rest the horses. "We'll stop here for a few hours," he said, dismounting. "Get some sleep if you can." Natalie slid from Penny's back, her legs stiff from the long ride. She removed the mare's saddle and brushed her down before seeing to her needs. Only then did she allow herself to sink onto her bedroll, exhaustion overtaking her. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked, as Zach handed her a strip of jerky and a canteen. He sat across from her, his back against a tree trunk. "Told you, don't like thieves. There must be more to it than that." Zach was quiet for so long Natalie thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. 5 years ago, my sister lost everything to a man like Halloway. Smooth-talking fellow who swept her off her feet, convinced her to sign over her inheritance. His jaw tightened. By the time I found out, he was long gone, and she was. He trailed off. "What happened to her?" Natalie asked softly. Couldn't face the shame. Took her own life. The words were flat, but pain radiated from them. "I've been tracking men like Halloway ever since. Not to kill them, though I've been tempted. To stop them before they destroy more lives." Natalie studied him with new understanding. "I'm sorry about your sister." "So am I." He met her gaze directly. "When I saw you outside that saloon, the look on your face, I knew, couldn't walk away." The simple honesty in his words touched something in Natalie. For the first time since discovering Pierce's betrayal, she felt a spark of hope. Perhaps there were still good men in the world. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for stopping." Zach nodded once, then gestured to her bedroll. "Rest. I'll keep watch." Natalie wanted to protest that she wasn't tired, but the moment she lay down, exhaustion claimed her. Her last thought before sleep was that despite everything, she felt safer with this scarred, taciturn stranger than she ever had with the man she'd planned to marry. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky. Zach was tending to the horses, checking their shoes with practiced hands. Natalie splashed creek water on her face, trying to wash away the remnants of troubled dreams. "There's coffee," Zach said without looking up. She found the small pot nestled in embers, the coffee strong and bitter, exactly what she needed to clear her head. "How long was I asleep?" 4 hours or so. He straightened, patting the gelding's flank. "We should reach Whispering Pines by tomorrow afternoon if we keep a good pace." As they packed up their minimal camp, Natalie's thoughts returned to Pierce and the ranch. "He won't just let this go, you know. That land is valuable water rights timber. He'll come looking. Let him." Zach's voice held a dangerous edge. "Man like that, pushing when he should back off, it usually ends badly for him. I don't want anyone hurt because of me." Zach's expression softened slightly. "Admirable, but misplaced. Halloway made his choices. Whatever happens is on him, not you." They mounted up and continued north, the landscape gradually changing as they rode. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of coming autumn. Natalie found herself studying her mysterious companion as they rode. Zach Reeves was a contradiction, hard and unyielding in his judgments, yet capable of unexpected kindness. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life in the saddle, and his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of danger. "How did you get that scar?" she asked during a brief stop to water the horses. Zach's hand unconsciously touched the mark through his eyebrow. "Bar fight. Man accused me of cheating at cards." "Were you?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, but he was too drunk to listen to reason." "Seems to be a lot of unreasonable men in the world," Natalie said wryly. "And women," Zach countered, but his tone was light. "Though I'd say the balance tips toward men, especially after they've had whiskey." They continued riding, and Natalie found herself relaxing in Zach's company. He didn't feel the need to fill silence with empty words the way Pierce had, and when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful. As dusk approached, they made camp in a protected hollow. Zach disappeared into the trees and returned with 2 rabbits, which he expertly cleaned and prepared for cooking. "You've spent a lot of time on the trail," Natalie observed as she helped build a small fire. "Most of my life," he agreed, setting the rabbits to roast. "Never much cared for town living. What about family? Besides your sister, I mean." "Parents died when I was young, raised by my grandfather until he passed." Zach settled back, watching the flames. "Been on my own since I was 17. "That's young to be alone in the world," he shrugged. "Managed well enough. What about you? Just your father, you said." "My mother died when I was 12. Influenza." Natalie wrapped her arms around her knees. "Father and I kept the ranch going together. He taught me everything: riding, roping, even shooting. Said a woman needs to take care of herself in this world. Wise man." "He would be so ashamed of me now," Natalie whispered. "Letting Pierce fool me like that." "Your father would understand that trusting isn't a weakness," Zach said firmly. "The shame belongs to Halloway, not you." The conviction in his voice warmed something inside her. They ate in comfortable silence, the night sounds creating a peaceful backdrop. Later, as Natalie settled onto her bedroll, she found herself wondering what might have happened if she'd met Zach Reeves before Pierce Halloway rode into Willow Creek. Would she have recognized the difference between a man of substance and a charming facade? Or would she still have been dazzled by Pierce's smooth words and promises? It didn't matter now. Her future lay in reclaiming what was rightfully hers, not in dwelling on past mistakes. With that resolve firm in her mind, she drifted into dreamless sleep. Morning brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain before nightfall. They broke camp quickly, eager to reach Whispering Pines before the storm hit. "Those horses were picking up," Natalie began as they rode. "Where are you taking them after?" "North Montana. Army outpost needs fresh mounts." Natalie considered this information. "That's a long journey. 3 weeks, give or take." Zach glanced at her. "You're welcome to ride along if you've a mind to. Could use the help." The offer surprised her. "I thought this was just until we reached your friend's ranch." "It was. But you handle horses well, and an extra set of eyes on the trail is always useful." He paused. "Unless you've other plans." Natalie thought about her options. She had no home to return to, no family waiting. The idea of continuing with Zach, of having purpose and direction, was appealing. "I'd need to be paid," she said, straightening in the saddle. "Fair wages for fair work." Zach's mouth quirked. "Naturally. Standard trail hand pay, plus expenses for when I return to Willow Creek to sort out the matter of my ranch." He nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Agreed. Though I'd advise having a lawyer with you when you do." "Do you know one?" "Matter of fact, I do. Man named Abernathy in Denver, specializes in land disputes." Zach adjusted his hat against the strengthening wind. "We can send him a telegram from Whispering Pines." The rain began shortly after midday, a steady drizzle that soon soaked through their coats. They rode without complaint, both accustomed to the discomforts of trail life. By late afternoon, the outline of a substantial ranch house appeared through the rain-swept landscape. Whispering Pines was larger than Natalie had expected, a sprawling main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, waving in welcome. "That'll be Thomas," Zach said, raising a hand in greeting. Thomas Wilson proved to be a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a booming voice and hearty laugh. He welcomed them enthusiastically, ordering hands to see to their horses and ushering them into the warmth of the main house. "You must be half drowned," he said, leading them to a roaring fire. "Martha, bring some coffee and towels for our guests." A plump woman with kind eyes bustled in, clucking over their sodden state. Within minutes, Natalie found herself wrapped in a dry blanket with a steaming cup in her hands. "So," Thomas said once they were settled, "this is the first time you've brought a lady companion on a delivery, Zach. Must be quite a story there." Zach's expression remained neutral. "Miss Winters had cause to leave Willow Creek suddenly. I offered assistance." Thomas's eyebrows rose, but he didn't press. "Well, you're both welcome here. The horses are ready, 8 of my finest quarter horses, just as you requested. But this rain's set to continue through tomorrow. Best wait it out before you start north." "Obliged," Zach said with a nod. Martha insisted on showing Natalie to a guest room where a hot bath awaited. The luxury of clean clothes and warm water after 2 days on the trail was indescribable. By the time Natalie rejoined the men for dinner, she felt almost human again. The dining room was cozy, with a long table that could seat 12 comfortably. Thomas's 3 grown sons joined them, along with the foreman and his wife. Conversation flowed easily, centered around cattle prices, horse bloodlines, and local gossip. Natalie found herself seated beside Zach, who seemed more relaxed in these surroundings than she'd yet seen him. He spoke knowledgeably about horses with Thomas, occasionally including her in the conversation with a glance or comment. "Miss Winters is joining me for the delivery to Fort Kearney," he explained when Thomas inquired about their plans. "She has a fine hand with horses." "That's so." Thomas looked at her with new interest. "You worked with horses before." "My father bred quarter horses on our ranch," Natalie replied. "Small operation compared to this, but good stock." "Winters," Thomas repeated thoughtfully. "Any relation to James Winters out of Texas?" Natalie's fork paused midway to her mouth. "That was my father." "Well, I'll be damned, pardon my language, miss. I bought a stallion from him about 10 years back. Fine animal, foundation of my current breeding program." Thomas beamed. "Your father had an eye for horseflesh." Pride warmed Natalie's chest. "Yes, he did." "His daughter seems to have inherited the talent," Zach added quietly. And Natalie felt a flush that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. After dinner, while the men retired to Thomas's study for brandy, Martha invited Natalie to join her in the sitting room. "It's not often we get female company," the older woman explained. "My boys are all sons, and the closest neighbor with daughters is 20 miles away." Martha was easy to talk to, sharing stories of ranch life without prying into Natalie's circumstances. Eventually, though, her curiosity got the better of her. "How did you come to be traveling with Zachariah?" she asked, her fingers busy with embroidery. "He's not usually one for companions." Natalie hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "We met in Willow Creek. I needed to leave urgently and he offered assistance." Martha's needle paused. "Zach's a good man. Been through more than his share of hardship, but it never hardened his heart, not completely anyway. You've known him long, since he was a boy. His grandfather and Thomas were friends." Martha smiled at some memory. "Used to spend summers here, learning horsemanship from Thomas. After his grandfather passed, he worked here for a few years before striking out on his own." This glimpse into Zach's past intrigued Natalie. "He doesn't speak much about himself." "Never did." Martha set aside her embroidery. "But you can trust him, Miss Winters. Whatever trouble you're running from, Zach won't let it find you." The confidence in Martha's voice was reassuring. Later, as Natalie prepared for bed in the comfortable guest room, she reflected on how quickly her life had changed. 3 days ago, she had been planning her wedding to Pierce Halloway. Now she was embarking on a journey with a man she barely knew, heading far from the only home she'd ever had. Yet strangely, she felt more at peace than she had in months. Perhaps because for the first time since her father's death, she wasn't facing her problems alone. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, as Thomas had predicted. Natalie spent the morning with Martha, helping with household tasks and learning more about whispering pines. In the afternoon, she visited the stables to check on Penny and to see the horses they would be taking north. The 8-quarter horses were magnificent, strong, well-muscled animals with intelligent eyes. Natalie moved among them, speaking softly and letting them grow accustomed to her scent and voice. "They're taking to you," Zach observed from the stable entrance. Natalie stroked a chestnut mare's neck. "They're beautiful animals. Your friend has a good breeding program, the best in 3 territories, according to him." Zach approached, stopping beside her. "Thomas says the rain should clear by morning. We can head out at first light. I'm ready." Natalie met his gaze steadily. "I sent that telegram to Mr. Abernathy as you suggested." "Good. He's a shrewd lawyer. If anyone can help you reclaim your land, it's him." They stood in companionable silence, watching the horses. Natalie became acutely aware of Zach's presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his tall frame, the subtle scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for everything." Zach looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the dim, stable light. For a moment, Natalie thought he might say something significant. Instead, he simply nodded. "Best get some rest. Long ride ahead tomorrow." He turned and left the stable, leaving Natalie with the curious sensation that something important had just happened or almost happened between them. True to prediction, dawn broke clear and bright. After a hearty breakfast and fond farewells from Martha and Thomas, they set out with their string of horses. The rain had left the world washed clean, the scent of wet pine and earth hanging in the crisp morning air. Driving 8 horses while managing their own mounts required concentration and teamwork. Natalie quickly fell into rhythm with Zach, anticipating when a horse might balk or stray. By midday, they had settled into a steady pace, the well-trained quarter horses following docilely. "You handle them well," Zach commented during a brief rest to water the animals. "Most folks need more time to find their footing with a new string." "They're responsive," Natalie replied, pleased by the compliment. "Makes the work easier. Still takes skill." He handed her a canteen. "Your father taught you well." The mention of her father brought a bittersweet smile. "He always said I had a natural way with horses, better than him even." "He sounds like a man who gave credit where it was due," Zach observed. "He was." Natalie took a drink of water. "Nothing like Pierce, who took credit for everyone else's ideas and work." Zach's expression darkened at the mention of Halloway. "Men like that eventually meet justice one way or another." "I'd prefer it be through the law," Natalie said firmly. "As would I." His tone suggested otherwise, but he didn't elaborate. They made good progress that day, covering nearly 20 miles before making camp in a sheltered valley. Working together to set up camp was becoming routine, Zach tending to the horses while Natalie gathered wood and started a fire, then sharing the cooking duties. As they sat beside the fire after their meal, Natalie found herself studying Zach's profile. In the flickering light, the harsh lines of his face softened, making him appear younger. "How did you become a horse trader?" she asked. Zach poked at the fire with a stick. "Fell into it, I suppose. Always had a way with horses, even as a boy. After working for Thomas, I realized I could make a living bringing good stock to places that needed it." "And you prefer the trail to settling down?" He was quiet for a moment. "Never found a reason to settle. Trail suits me fine." Something in his tone made Natalie wonder if there was more to the story. "No one waiting for you somewhere?" Zach's mouth quirked. "Curious, aren't you? Just making conversation." "No," he said after a pause. "No one waiting, you. Only Pierce, and we know how that turned out." Natalie wrapped her arms around her knees. "I thought I knew what my future held. Now I'm not sure of anything." Sometimes that's not such a bad place to be, Zach said quietly. Clean slate, fresh possibilities. The way he looked at her as he said it sent a flutter through Natalie's chest, a sensation she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after Pierce's betrayal. Perhaps you're right, she conceded, turning her gaze back to the fire. They fell into comfortable silence, the night sounds creating a peaceful backdrop. Eventually, they settled into their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Natalie lay awake for some time, watching the stars and contemplating the strange twist her life had taken. For the next 5 days, they traveled steadily northward, falling into an easy routine. The weather held fair, and the horses behaved admirably, making for smooth progress. Each evening, Natalie found herself looking forward to the quiet conversations with Zach around the campfire. She learned he had fought briefly in the war, though he spoke little of it. That he could read and write better than most men on the frontier, thanks to his grandfather's insistence on education. That he had a dry sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly, usually when she least anticipated it. In turn, she told him about growing up on the ranch, about her dreams of expanding the horse breeding operation her father had started, about the books she loved, and the places she hoped to see someday. On the 6th night, as they made camp in a grove of aspens, Zach returned from hunting with a brace of grouse. "Feast tonight," he said, holding up the birds. Natalie smiled. A welcome change from jerky and beans. As she prepared the birds for cooking, Zach tended to the horses. She found herself watching him, appreciating the gentle way he handled even the most spirited animal. It was so different from Pierce, who had always been impatient with horses, seeing them as tools rather than partners. "Something amusing?" Zach asked, catching her gaze. Natalie shook her head. "Just thinking about differences in men, comparing me to Halloway." His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "Perhaps." She turned back to the birds. "Not in your favor if that's what you're worried about." A smile ghosted across his face. "Good to know." They ate well that night, the grouse tender and flavorful. After dinner, Zach pulled a small flask from his saddlebag. "Special occasion?" Natalie asked as he offered it to her. "Of sorts. We're halfway to Fort Kearney," he shrugged. "Seemed worth marking." Natalie accepted the flask, taking a small sip. The whiskey burned pleasantly down her throat. "Smoother than what they serve at the Willow Creek Saloon." "Should hope so. This is the good stuff." Zach took the flask back, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "Thomas's private stock." The casual touch sent a ripple of awareness through Natalie, surprising in its intensity. She found herself noticing things she hadn't before: the way Zach's hands were strong yet capable of gentleness, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he almost smiled, the solid breadth of his shoulders beneath his worn coat. "Tell me something about yourself you haven't told anyone else," she said impulsively. Zach raised an eyebrow. "That's a mighty personal request. We've been traveling together for over a week. Seems like we should know at least one secret about each other." He considered this, taking another sip from the flask. "All right, but you go first." Natalie thought for a moment. "I've never actually wanted to marry Pierce," she admitted quietly. "I convinced myself I did because it seemed practical. The ranch was struggling after Father died and Pierce had money and connections. But every time he kissed me I felt nothing." Zach's expression was unreadable in the firelight. "Why agree to marry him then?" "Security, practicality," she sighed. "Fear of being alone, perhaps." "Foolish reasons looking back." "Not foolish, human." Zach passed the flask back to her. "Your turn to hear a secret, I suppose." Natalie waited, curious what this reserved man might reveal. "I could have settled down 5 years ago," he said finally. "Woman named Rebecca. Daughter of a rancher in Colorado. She wanted to marry, have a family. What happened? I left. The simple statement held volumes of unspoken regret. After my sister died, I couldn't see past vengeance. Tracking men like Halloway became more important than building a life. Do you regret it? Zach stared into the fire. Used to, not so much anymore. Rebecca married a shopkeeper, has 3 children now, better life than I could have given her. You don't think you could be a good husband? Natalie asked softly. Didn't say that. His eyes met hers across the flames. Just wasn't ready then. Too much anger, too restless. And now, the question hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to address. Finally, Zach shrugged. Now I'm sitting by a fire with a woman who asks too many questions, he said, but the warmth in his voice took any sting from the words. Natalie smiled, accepting the deflection. Fair enough. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low. When Natalie finally retired to her bedroll, she found her thoughts occupied not with Pierce's betrayal or her lost ranch, but with the enigmatic man sleeping on the other side of the dying embers. The next day brought a change in the weather and in their luck. Dark clouds gathered by mid-morning, and by noon, a cold rain began to fall. They pushed on, both too experienced to be bothered by a little water. But as the afternoon wore on, the gentle rain became a deluge, turning the trail muddy and treacherous. Need to find shelter, Zach called over the pounding rain. Storm's getting worse. Natalie nodded, water streaming from the brim of her hat. The horses were growing skittish, not liking the combination of mud, wind, and crashing thunder. They struggled to keep the string together as visibility decreased. There, Zach pointed to a dark shape through the curtain of rain. Looks like an old line shack. They guided the increasingly nervous horses toward the structure, a small, weathered cabin tucked against a rocky hillside. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter from the worsening storm. The cabin's door was stiff but opened with a solid push. Inside was a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and not much else. While Natalie checked for unwelcome wildlife, Zach led the horses to a lean-to attached to the cabin's side. It was cramped, but it would keep the animals out of the worst of the weather. By the time they had the horses settled and their essential gear inside, both were soaked to the skin. Natalie's teeth chattered as she knelt by the fireplace, trying to coax a flame from the small pile of wood left by some previous occupant. Here, Zach said, kneeling beside her. He took the flint from her trembling hands and quickly had a small fire burning. Need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Natalie glanced around the one-room cabin. Not much privacy. I'll step outside while you change, he offered. Check on the horses again. You're as wet as I am, she protested. You need to dry off too. Zach's jaw tightened. I'll manage. Don't be ridiculous. Natalie rummaged in her saddlebags for her spare shirt and trousers. Turn your back, we're both adults. After a moment's hesitation, Zach nodded and turned to face the wall. Natalie changed quickly, the dry clothes a blessed relief against her chilled skin. She hung her wet garments near the fire, then wrapped herself in a blanket. Your turn, she said, turning her back to give him the same courtesy. She heard the rustle of fabric as Zach changed, trying not to think about the man undressing mere feet away. When he gave the all clear, she turned to find him in dry clothes, his hair damp and tousled where he'd run his hands through it. Outside, the storm raged, wind howling around the cabin's eaves and rain lashing against the single window. Inside, the fire created a small circle of warmth and light. Storm might last all night, Zach observed, adding more wood to the fire. At least we have shelter. Natalie tried to sound optimistic, though the prospect of spending the night in such close quarters was both unsettling and strangely exhilarating. They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, supplemented with coffee Zach brewed over the fire. The hot liquid helped chase away the last of the chill, and Natalie felt herself relaxing despite the storm's fury. "Feels almost cozy," she remarked, looking around the Spartan cabin. "In a primitive sort of way." Zach's mouth quirked. "Not quite the accommodations you're used to, I imagine." "I grew up on a working ranch, not in some fancy Eastern mansion," Natalie reminded him. "I've slept in worse places than this. Such as hay loft during roundup, cave while waiting out a blizzard with my father." She smiled at the memory. "Once spent a night up a tree when I was 12 after stumbling across a bear and her cubs." Zach chuckled, the sound warm in the small space. "Resourceful even then." "Had to be. Father said the frontier doesn't forgive weakness." "Wise man." Zach's expression grew serious. "Though I'd amend that to say the frontier doesn't forgive foolishness. Nothing weak about knowing when to seek shelter or ask for help." The observation surprised Natalie. "Most men I know equate asking for help with weakness." "Most men are fools," Zach said simply. Natalie laughed, the sound bright against the storm's backdrop. "Present company excluded, I presume, on my better days." His eyes met hers, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. To distract herself, Natalie rose and moved to the window, peering out at the rain-swept darkness. "Will this delay us much? A day, perhaps. Depends how quickly the ground firms up." Zach joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. "We're still making good time." Natalie was acutely aware of his proximity, of the subtle scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to him. When she turned her head, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Zach," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. A crash of thunder directly overhead made them both jump, breaking the moment. Zach stepped back, clearing his throat. "Should get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Long day tomorrow, storm or no." Natalie nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the return to practicality. They arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, the small cabin allowing little distance between them. As Natalie lay listening to the storm, she found sleep elusive. Across the fire, Zach's breathing indicated he was similarly awake. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words and unfamiliar feelings. "Zach," she said softly. Do you think there's a chance I'll get my ranch back?" He was quiet for a moment. "If the deed was signed under false pretenses, yes. Abernathy's good at what he does. And if not?" The question that had been haunting her finally emerged. "What then?" Zach shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her across the fire. "Then you start fresh. You're young, capable. Could work for Thomas, he'd hire you in a heartbeat after seeing how you handle horses." "Or I could continue as your partner," Natalie suggested, surprising herself with the boldness. "In the horse trading business." Something flickered in Zach's eyes. "Could do worse for a partner," he agreed cautiously. "Though it's a hard life, long trails, rough conditions. I've managed so far." "That you have." The admiration in his voice warmed her more than the fire. "Something to consider, then." They fell silent again, but the tension had shifted to something more companionable. Eventually, lulled by the rhythmic sound of rain on the roof and the crackling fire, Natalie drifted to sleep. She woke once in the night, momentarily disoriented. The fire had burned low, casting the cabin in shadow. Through the dimness, she could make out Zach's form, his face relaxed in sleep. He looked younger. The hard lines of experience softened. Natalie found herself wondering what it would be like to wake to that face every morning, to build a life with someone who valued honesty and strength the way Zach seemed to. The thought should have frightened her after Pierce's betrayal, but instead, it filled her with a tentative hope. Morning brought clearing skies and the realization that the storm had been a blessing in disguise. As they stepped outside to check on the horses, a rider approached from the south, the direction they had come from. "Get back inside," Zach said quietly, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Natalie didn't argue, retreating to the cabin but watching through the window as the rider drew closer. Even at a distance, something about the man's posture seemed familiar. When recognition dawned, her blood ran cold. "It's Pierce," she whispered as Zach stepped back inside. "How did he find us?" Likely asked at every town and ranch between here and Willow Creek. Zach's expression was grim. "Stay inside, I'll handle this." "No," Natalie said firmly. "This is my fight, I won't hide." After a moment's consideration, Zach nodded. "Together then, but let me do the talking at first." They stepped outside as Pierce Halloway reined his horse to a stop 20 yards from the cabin. He looked trail-worn but still managed to project the smooth confidence that had once charmed Natalie. "Well, well," Pierce called, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Quite a chase you've led me on, Natalie." "What do you want, Halloway?" Zach's voice was deceptively calm. Pierce's gaze shifted dismissively to Zach, then back to Natalie. "I've come for my fiancé, of course. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding was mine," Natalie replied coldly. "When I believed you actually intended to marry me instead of stealing my ranch." Pierce's expression hardened. "Now, darling, that's a harsh accusation. I have the deed signed over quite legally." "Under false pretenses," Zach interjected. "That's fraud, Halloway." "And who might you be? The knight in dusty armor?" Pierce's laugh held no humor. "Natalie, surely you haven't fallen for this. Trail hand." The contempt in his voice made Natalie's spine stiffen. "Mr. Reeves has shown me more honesty in 2 weeks than you did in 6 months, Pierce. And he's right, you obtained that deed through lies and manipulation." "Prove it," Pierce challenged, his charming facade slipping further. "It's your word against mine, and I have the paper with your signature." "And I have your letter," Natalie countered. "The one where you boasted to your friend about how you'd swindled the naive Winters girl out of her valuable ranch, how you never had any intention of marrying me." Pierce's face paled slightly. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Natalie met his gaze steadily. "You left it in your coat pocket." "The coat I was mending the day before I discovered your true nature." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Pierce's face, quickly replaced by calculation. "Even if such a letter existed, it wouldn't change the fact that the deed is legally mine." "That's for a court to decide," Zach said, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "A judge might take interest in your pattern of behavior, Halloway. You've done this before." "You know nothing about me," Pierce snapped. "I know about Sarah Reeves," Zach said quietly. "And Elizabeth Compton, and Mary Fitzgerald. All women who signed over property to you under the promise of marriage." Pierce's expression shifted from confidence to wariness. "Who the hell are you?" "Sarah was my sister," Zach said, his voice dangerously soft. "She killed herself after you ruined her." Understanding dawned on Pierce's face, followed by the first traces of fear. His hand moved toward his own pistol. "I wouldn't," Zach warned. "I'm not looking to kill you, Halloway. Justice will serve better than vengeance." For a tense moment, Natalie thought Pierce might draw anyway. Then, with a visible effort, he controlled himself. "This isn't over," he said, his voice tight with anger. "That ranch is legally mine." "For now," Natalie agreed. "But not for long. I suggest you enjoy it while you can." Pierce's gaze shifted between them, calculating his options. Finally, he gathered his reins. "You're making a mistake, Natalie. I could have given you everything." "You could have," she agreed. "But you chose deception instead. Now I choose something else." Without another word, Pierce wheeled his horse around and rode away, his rigid posture speaking volumes about his fury. Natalie let out a shaky breath once he was out of sight. "He'll be trouble." "Yes," Zach agreed, "but he's also a coward at heart. Now that he knows we're onto him, he'll likely try to sell the ranch quickly before legal proceedings begin." "Can he do that?" "Not if we move faster." Zach turned to her. "We should split up. You continue with the horses to Fort Kearney. I'll ride to Denver, meet with Abernathy, then join you at the fort." Natalie shook her head. "No, I need to see Abernathy myself. It's my ranch, my fight. It's dangerous." "Halloway might—" "I'm not afraid of Pierce," Natalie interrupted, "and I won't hide while others fight my battles." Zach studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. We deliver the horses together, then ride to Denver. The army will have to wait a few extra days for their mounts." Relief flooded Natalie. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead and a determined enemy." Zach's expression softened slightly. "But I believe you'll get your ranch back, Natalie. You've got something Halloway doesn't." "What's that?" "Truth on your side, and more courage than he could imagine." The simple statement, delivered without flourish, touched Natalie deeply. Impulsively, she stepped forward and pressed a kiss to Zach's cheek. "What was that for?" he asked, looking startled. "For believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself." She stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "And for being the man Pierce pretended to be." Zach's expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made Natalie's heart beat faster. Before he could respond, one of the horses nickered impatiently from the lean-to. "We should get moving," Natalie said, breaking the moment. "Long ride ahead." Zach nodded, but as they prepared to depart, Natalie caught him watching her with an intensity that suggested their conversation was far from over. The trail was muddy from the storm, slowing their progress. By unspoken agreement, they pushed harder than before, both aware that Pierce might not have ridden away for good. They made camp that night in a defensible position, taking turns keeping watch. During her shift, Natalie found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in such a short time. 2 weeks ago, she had been preparing to marry a man she didn't love, convinced it was her best option. Now she was pursuing justice with a man who challenged and respected her in equal measure. More surprising was the realization that somewhere along the trail, her heart had begun to heal and to open to new possibilities. The thought of Zach had begun to occupy her mind in ways that both excited and frightened her. When they reached Fort Kearney 3 days later, the commanding officer was pleased with the quality of the horses, but less than thrilled about their plan to depart immediately for Denver. "Contract says you deliver and stay for 3 days to ensure the animals settle properly," Colonel Harrison reminded Zach. "Circumstances have changed," Zach explained, keeping details vague. "Miss Winters has urgent business in Denver, legal matters that won't wait." The colonel glanced at Natalie, his expression softening slightly. "I see. Well, I suppose we can manage the settling in ourselves." He handed Zach a pouch of coins, payment in full as agreed. As they left the fort, Zach handed half the payment to Natalie. "Your share, as promised." Natalie stared at the coins. It was more money than she'd held in a long time. "Thank you. This will help with legal expenses." "That it will." Zach seemed about to say more, then changed his mind. "We should reach Denver in 4 days if we ride hard." The journey to Denver was tense but uneventful. They saw no sign of Pierce, though Natalie couldn't shake the feeling he was somehow ahead of them, planning his next move. Denver was larger and more bustling than Natalie had expected. After weeks on the trail, the noise and crowds were overwhelming. Zach seemed to sense her discomfort, staying close as they navigated the busy streets to a modest hotel. "We'll get 2 rooms," he said as they approached the front desk. "Rest today. See Abernathy first thing tomorrow." The lawyer's office was located in a brick building near the courthouse. Arthur Abernathy proved to be a thin, sharp-eyed man in his 60s, with spectacles perched on a prominent nose. He listened attentively as Natalie explained her situation, occasionally making notes. "Let me see this letter," he said when she finished. Natalie handed over the damning evidence. Abernathy read it carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each line. "This is certainly compelling," he said finally. "Combined with Mr. Reeves's knowledge of other similar cases, I believe we have grounds to petition the court for a temporary injunction preventing Mr. Halloway from selling your property." "How long will that take?" Natalie asked anxiously. "I can file the paperwork today." "With luck, we'll have the injunction by tomorrow." Abernathy tapped the letter. "This is key evidence. I suggest you leave it with me for safekeeping." Natalie hesitated, then nodded. "What happens after the injunction? We build our case. Gather testimonies from these other women Mr. Reeves mentioned. Present evidence of Mr. Halloway's pattern of fraud." Abernathy leaned forward. "It won't be quick, Miss Winters. Legal proceedings rarely are. But with this letter and proper witnesses, I believe we can restore your property rights." "How long?" Zach asked bluntly. 3 months, perhaps longer." Abernathy spread his hands apologetically. "The courts move at their own pace." Natalie's heart sank. "I can't stay in Denver for months. I don't have the resources." "You wouldn't need to be present for every proceeding," Abernathy assured her. "Only for your testimony and the final judgment." "What about Halloway?" Zach asked. "He'll fight this." "Undoubtedly. Men like him often do." Abernathy's thin lips curved into a predatory smile. "But in my experience, when confronted with overwhelming evidence, even the most stubborn opponent can be persuaded to settle." After discussing fees and strategy, they left Abernathy's office with a plan in place. The lawyer would file for the injunction immediately and begin gathering evidence from Halloway's other victims. 3 months, Natalie sighed as they walked back toward their hotel. "What am I supposed to do for 3 months?" Zach was quiet for a moment. "Could stay in Denver, find work." "With what money? The hotel costs more per week than I earned in a month at the ranch." "Or," Zach said carefully, "you could come with me. I've got another delivery contract, Montana territory. Good pay." Natalie glanced at him, surprised by the offer. "You'd want me along?" "You're a good trail partner," he said simply. "And it would keep you away from Halloway until the case is settled." The practical reasons made sense, but Natalie suspected there was more to the offer than Zach was saying. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "I'll think about it," she promised. That evening they dined in the hotel's modest restaurant. After weeks of trail cooking, the hot meal was a luxury, and Natalie found herself relaxing for the first time since leaving Willow Creek. "Tell me about Montana," she said, sipping the glass of wine Zach had insisted on ordering. "I've never been that far north. Beautiful country. Harsher winters than you're used to, but the summers are mild. Good grazing land." Zach's expression softened as he described the territory. "Sky seems bigger there somehow. Mountains that make a man feel small in the best possible way." "You love it there," Natalie observed. "I do." He met her gaze across the table. "Bought some land there last year. Nothing fancy. Cabin stable, about 200 acres along a river." This was news to Natalie. "You're settling down, thinking about it." Zach looked almost embarrassed by the admission. "Trail life gets lonely after a while." Natalie's heart quickened at the implication. "What would you do with 200 acres, raise horses?" "Good breeding stock, like your father did." Zach traced the rim of his glass with one finger. "Need a partner with an eye for horseflesh, though." The offer hung between them, unspoken but clear. Natalie found herself imagining it a life in Montana, building something new with this man who had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. "Zach," she began, uncertain how to respond. "You don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "Just something to consider while we wait for Abernathy to work his legal magic." Before Natalie could reply, a commotion at the restaurant entrance drew their attention. Pierce Halloway stood in the doorway, his gaze scanning the room until it locked on their table. His face twisted with anger as he strode toward them. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet restaurant, "following the trail of your little legal maneuvers." Zach rose slowly to his feet. "This isn't the place, Halloway." "On the contrary," Pierce sneered, "public is perfect. Witnesses to hear how this woman," he jabbed a finger toward Natalie, "is trying to steal my legally acquired property." "Your fraud is the theft," Natalie said, standing as well, "and we have proof." Something dangerous flashed in Pierce's eyes. "That letter forgery." "Your word against mine, darling. And the words of other women you've swindled," Zach added quietly. "Abernathy's contacting them all." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Pierce's face. "Bluffing." "Am I?" Zach stepped closer, his voice dropping so only Pierce could hear. "Elizabeth Compton is already in Denver. Mary Fitzgerald arrives tomorrow. How many more, Halloway? How many lives have you destroyed with your schemes?" Pierce's confidence visibly crumbled. He glanced around the restaurant, aware of the disapproving stares from other diners. "This isn't over," he hissed, but the threat lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Natalie said firmly. "Go back to Willow Creek, Pierce. Enjoy the ranch while you can. The court will decide the rest." For a moment, Pierce looked as though he might lash out physically. Then, with a visible effort, he controlled himself. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Both of you." With that, he turned and stalked out of the restaurant. A collective breath seemed to release among the other diners, and conversation gradually resumed. Natalie sank back into her chair, her appetite gone. "He won't give up easily." "No," Zach agreed, retaking his seat. "But he's running scared now. Men like Halloway rely on their victims staying silent, isolated. Once they realize they're not alone, his power diminishes." "I hope you're right." Natalie pushed her plate away. "I've lost my taste for dinner." "Understandable." Zach signaled for the bill. "We should return to the hotel. Might be safer to stay together tonight." The implication made Natalie blush despite the seriousness of the situation. "I can take care of myself." "Never doubted it." Zach's mouth quirked. "But Halloway's desperate. 2 against 1 improves the odds." Reluctantly, Natalie agreed. They walked back to the hotel in watchful silence, both scanning the streets for any sign of Pierce. At Natalie's door, Zach hesitated. "I'll take the chair," he said, nodding toward a small armchair by the window. "If you're comfortable with the arrangement." Natalie considered refusing, insisting she'd be fine alone. But the memory of Pierce's barely contained rage gave her pause. "All right," she agreed. "But we take turns in the chair. I'll keep watch while you sleep. Then we switch." Zach looked as though he might argue, then nodded. "Fair enough." The night passed uneventfully, though Natalie found sleep elusive even during her rest period. The presence of Zach in her room, even maintaining a respectful distance in the uncomfortable chair, was distracting in ways she hadn't anticipated. Morning brought news from Abernathy. The injunction had been granted. Pierce could not sell the ranch until the court ruled on Natalie's claim. More encouragingly, 2 of his previous victims had agreed to testify about his fraudulent methods. "It's looking good, Miss Winters," Abernathy assured her when they visited his office. "Mr. Halloway's pattern of behavior is establishing itself clearly. I've even had an inquiry from the sheriff in Boulder about similar complaints there." "How long until the case is heard?" Natalie asked. 3 months remains my best estimate. Abernathy shuffled some papers. In the meantime, I suggest you keep your distance from Willow Creek and Mr. Halloway. We're planning to, Zach said. Miss Winters will be accompanying me to Montana until the case concludes. The decision, stated so matter-of-factly, surprised Natalie. She hadn't formally agreed to Zach's proposition, yet she found herself nodding in agreement. As they left Abernathy's office, Natalie addressed the assumption. I don't recall saying I'd go to Montana. Zach had the grace to look abashed. Presumptuous of me, you're right. He stopped walking to face her directly. Natalie, would you consider coming to Montana as my business partner? Nothing more if that's not what you want. The qualification, if that's not what you want, hung in the air between them. Natalie studied his face, seeing beyond the weathered exterior to the man beneath honest, honorable, and perhaps more vulnerable than he appeared. And if I wanted more? She asked softly, something like hope flashed in Zach's eyes. Then we'd have to discuss terms. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Natalie found herself smiling. Terms, partnership terms. Zach took a step closer. Equal say in decisions, shared responsibilities, mutual respect. Sounds reasonable, Natalie agreed, her heart quickening. What about? She hesitated, suddenly shy. What about feelings? Zach finished for her. Those aren't negotiable, Natalie, they just are. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I know it's fast. After Halloway, you've every reason to be cautious, but I think there's something here worth exploring. The gentle touch of his fingers against her cheek sent warmth cascading through Natalie. In that moment, the noise of Denver's busy streets faded away, leaving only the two of them. I think so too, she admitted. But I need time, Zach, to be sure. Time you shall have. He stepped back, restoring a respectable distance between them. Montana's a good place for thinking. The journey to Montana Territory took nearly 3 weeks. They traveled at a more leisurely pace than before, stopping in small towns along the way to send and receive telegrams from Abernathy. The news continued to be encouraging, more witnesses coming forward, evidence mounting against Pierce. As they rode north, the landscape changed dramatically. The plains gave way to rolling hills, then to the foothills of mountains whose peaks seemed to touch the clouds. Natalie found herself entranced by the wild beauty of the country. It's magnificent, she breathed as they crested a rise overlooking a valley where a river wound like a silver ribbon through lush meadows. This is it, Zach said quietly. My land. Natalie turned to him in surprise. Here. This valley, he nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. Cabins just beyond that stand of pines. Creek feeds into the river there. Good water year-round. It's perfect, Natalie said honestly. The valley looked like something from a dream, sheltered by mountains, with ample grazing land and water. They rode down into the valley, and Natalie could see why Zach had been drawn to this place. It had a feeling of sanctuary, of peace. The cabin, when they reached it, was simple but solidly built. A small stable stood nearby, with a corral large enough for a dozen horses. It's not much, Zach said as he helped her dismount. Been meaning to expand the cabin, add a proper kitchen, maybe another bedroom. It's wonderful, Natalie assured him, taking in the scene. You could build something special here. That's the hope. Zach's eyes met hers, and Natalie understood he wasn't just talking about buildings and horses. The weeks in Montana passed in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. They delivered the horses Zach had contracted for, then returned to the cabin to begin improvements. Natalie threw herself into the work, finding satisfaction in physical labor that left little time for worry about the distant legal proceedings. Zach proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to notch logs for the cabin extension, how to mend fences the Montana way built to withstand heavy snows and determined bears. In turn, Natalie shared her knowledge of horse breeding, discussing bloodlines and traits they might develop in their own stock. Their conversations frequently included "we" and "our" now, the assumption of a shared future becoming more natural with each passing day. Yet Zach maintained a respectful distance, true to his word about giving Natalie time. At night, he slept in the cabin while Natalie used a small tent pitched nearby. The arrangement was proper but increasingly frustrating for both of them. The attraction between them grew stronger, tempered by Natalie's lingering caution and Zach's determination not to rush her. On a warm evening in early August, as they sat by a campfire outside the now expanded cabin, Abernathy's latest telegram arrived via a passing ranch hand. Zach read it silently, then handed it to Natalie. Case moving forward. Stop Halloway offering settlement. Stop advise return Denver soonest. Stop Abernathy. Natalie stared at the paper, emotions warring within her. He's giving up, offering to settle, Zach corrected. Likely sees the writing on the wall. We should leave tomorrow, Natalie said, already mentally preparing for the journey. We should, Zach agreed, though something in his tone gave Natalie pause. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What is it? Before we go, he said carefully, there's something I need to say, something I've been wanting to say for weeks now. Natalie's heart began to race. I'm listening. Zach took a deep breath. I love you, Natalie, have for a while now, probably since that night in the line shack during the storm. He held up a hand when she started to speak. Let me finish. You don't need to answer now. Maybe not until after the case is settled, but I wanted you to know before we return to Denver, before we face Halloway again. The simple declaration, delivered without flourish or manipulation, touched Natalie deeply. Here was honesty, the opposite of everything Pierce had represented. I've been thinking, she said after a moment, about what happens after the case, if I get the ranch back. When you get it back, Zach corrected gently. When, she agreed with a small smile. The thing is, I'm not sure I want to return to Willow Creek permanently. Too many memories now. Hope flickered in Zach's eyes. And if not Willow Creek? There's this valley in Montana, Natalie said, moving to sit beside him. Beautiful place. Good water, fine grazing land. Man who owns it is looking for a partner with an eye for horseflesh. Is that so? Zach's voice was husky, Natalie's hand found his. Thing is, I think I might want more than a business partnership. Zach's fingers tightened around hers. What might that be? Everything, Natalie said simply. A life together, a family someday, a love built on truth instead of lies. She took a deep breath. I love you too, Zach. I think I have since you said trust me that night in Willow Creek. The joy that transformed Zach's face was beautiful to behold. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. The kiss was nothing like Pierce's calculated embraces. It was honest, tender, and filled with promise. When they finally parted, Natalie felt as though something long broken inside her had finally healed. So, Zach said, his voice rough with emotion, we go to Denver, settle your case, then return here. That's the plan, Natalie agreed. If you're amenable to the terms, Zach chuckled. More than amenable, though there's one condition I'd like to add. Oh, when we return, he said, suddenly serious, it's as husband and wife, if you'll have me. Natalie's heart soared at the proposal. I think those terms are acceptable, Mr. Reeves. Their return to Denver took 10 days of hard riding. They arrived to find the city buzzing with gossip about Pierce Halloway's case. It seemed Natalie's situation had struck a chord with the public, particularly after other victims came forward. Abernathy met them at his office, looking pleased with developments. Mr. Halloway is eager to settle, he explained. The evidence against him has become overwhelming. 3 more women have come forward with similar stories. What's he offering? Natalie asked. Full restoration of your property rights, plus compensation for damages. Abernathy named a sum that made Natalie's eyebrows rise. He's desperate to avoid a public trial at this point. Why would I settle? Natalie asked. Shouldn't he face consequences for what he's done to all of us? He will, Abernathy assured her. The settlement only covers your civil claim. The district attorney is pursuing criminal charges based on the pattern of fraud. Zach nodded approvingly. So he'll face jail time regardless. Most likely, yes. Abernathy shuffled some papers on his desk. The settlement conference is tomorrow. You'll need to decide by then whether to accept his offer. After leaving Abernathy's office, Natalie and Zach walked through Denver's busy streets, discussing the development. What do you think? Natalie asked. Should I settle? It's your decision, Zach said carefully. But practically speaking, a settlement guarantees you get your ranch back immediately. A trial could drag on with no certain outcome. Natalie nodded, seeing the wisdom in his words. And with the ranch secure, we could sell it and use the funds to build our operation in Montana. If that's what you want, Zach agreed. It is. Natalie stopped walking to face him. I want to start fresh, Zach, with you. The ranch is my heritage, but it's also tied to painful memories now. Zach's expression softened. Then we'll build something new together. The settlement conference the next day was tense but brief. Pierce Halloway, once so confident and charming, looked pale and diminished. He avoided Natalie's gaze as his lawyer presented the settlement terms. When it was her turn to speak, Natalie addressed Pierce directly. I accept your offer, she said clearly. Not because I forgive what you did, but because it allows me to move forward. Pierce finally met her eyes, and for a moment, Natalie thought she saw genuine regret there. Then his gaze shifted to Zach, and his expression hardened. You've won, he said flatly. Congratulations. This isn't about winning, Natalie replied. It's about justice, for me and for every woman you deceived. With the settlement signed and notarized, Natalie officially reclaimed ownership of her father's ranch. The compensation would be paid within 30 days, according to the terms. What now? Zach asked as they left the courthouse. Natalie took his hand, no longer concerned about propriety. Now we get married, sell the ranch, and go home to Montana. Home, Zach repeated, the word filled with meaning. I like the sound of that. They were married 2 days later in a simple ceremony at Denver's small church. Martha and Thomas Wilson made the journey from Whispering Pines to stand as witnesses, bringing news that they'd like to purchase Natalie's ranch as an expansion of their own operation. Seems fitting, Natalie said after accepting their offer. My father always respected your breeding program. With their future secured, Natalie and Zach returned to Montana as husband and wife. The valley welcomed them home with a spectacular sunset that painted the mountains gold and crimson. Standing on the porch of their cabin, Zach's arm around her waist, Natalie reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. Pierce's betrayal, painful as it had been, had ultimately led her to something far more precious, a love built on trust and truth. Happy? Zach asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. More than I ever thought possible, Natalie admitted. Though we have a lot of work ahead, that we do. Zach's eyes sparkled with plans and promises. Thought we might start by expanding the stables, then maybe add a nursery to the cabin. A nursery. Natalie raised an eyebrow. Planning ahead, Mr. Reeves. Always, Mrs. Reeves. His smile held all the love and honesty she'd ever hoped to find. Always. 5 years later, Natalie sat on the same porch, watching Zach teach their 3-year-old son James how to brush a gentle mare. Their daughter Sarah, just beginning to toddle, played at Natalie's feet. The ranch had flourished beyond their expectations. Their breeding program, combining Zach's knowledge of mountain hardy stock with Natalie's eye for conformation, had produced horses sought after throughout the territories. News had reached them last winter that Pierce Halloway had served his sentence and left the country, reportedly for South America. Natalie had felt nothing but a distant pity for the man who had once seemed to hold her future in his hands. "Mama, look," James called, beaming with pride as he carefully guided the brush over the mare's flank. "I'm doing it right." "You certainly are," Natalie called back, her heart full. Zach looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, the one reserved just for her, still made her heart skip even after years of marriage. "I'd say we built something pretty fine here," he said later that night as they stood together on the porch, watching stars appear over their valley. "We did," Natalie agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Something true." And in that moment, surrounded by the life they'd created together, Natalie silently thanked whatever fate or providence had led her to trust the quiet cowboy who had promised nothing but honesty and had given her everything.